This is ABA On Call. I'm Rick Cabina, joined by my colleague and co-host Doug Kostowitz. If you work in behavior analysis, or you care how behavior actually unfolds in the real world, you're in the right place. Here, we take a clear look at the decisions, patterns, and assumptions that shape our field. No noise, no shortcuts, just a straightforward look at what matters and why. Let's jump into today's conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to ABA On Call. Today, Doug is not joining me. He's out there doing something, which I don't know what he's doing, but I'm sure it's a lot of fun. And I am joined by a special guest, and the special guest is my dear colleague at CentralReach. Her name is Kelly King, and she is the manager of clinical AI governance. Oh, that's a big title, Kelly.
It's a mouthful. I'm happy to be here.
So glad that you're here. And Kelly, you have spent the last several years, not just in the trenches, but also out there talking with people. And you are in a very interesting position when it comes to understanding AI. AI is this phenomena it's transforming society. It's one of those things, one of those technologies that people are always like, oh, it's like electricity, when all we get, like, you hear all of these very big, bold claims about it, but there's no doubt it's having an impact in one way or another. What I'd like to ask you to start this conversation off is, how did you get into AI as a BCBA? I'm sure when you got your BCBA, your thinking wasn't like, hey, I'm going to go into AI and do all these things, but that's where you find yourself.
That is currently where I find myself. And it's an interesting journey I've been on to get here. 2.5, almost 3 years ago, I was working on the Institute team, so CentralReach content development. I tend to lean tech heavy and focused. I enjoy that aspect of our work. So when I was working clinically, as even prior to a BCBA in more direct roles, I always leaned that way and how we can leverage, technology. I think back to some of my earliest, like, really quality training that I received, and I was graphing with paper and pencil. I was using a typewriter for phase change lines, and if you got to the end of that 6 months and you messed up your typewriter or jammed, you were plotting every other data point for the entire period of time. So I think that maybe ages me a little bit. I've been in the field for 20 plus years now, which is wild. And finding myself at CentralReach and being able to kind of disseminate the science of ABA through technology, through our CEU content and regulatory coursework, it felt natural to leverage some of the tools and technologies that we had. And then with the advent of, ChatGPT being released to the masses and large language models, I had the privilege and the happenstance to have people who care deeply about seeing how we could use this technology to improve the work that we did. People who were, visionary and wanted to see what was possible. And I tend to dive right into that, like, learn everything that I can. And I had the time too. So, from a privileged perspective of, we're a very busy team, and I was new enough to not have been embedded in so many different aspects that I had the time to explore at CentralReach, which was really wonderful. And it allowed me to kind of marry my passions of ABA, science of behavior, the importance of ethics around that, and also how we could leverage this cool new technology. So perfect set of circumstances led me to, I guess, where I'm at now, which has been a really fun exploration and slow to start, and also wildly fast in many ways, which I think is what we're seeing with the innovation right now, especially in our space of ABA.
When you look back at your career, was there anything that you think prepared you, or would it be your opinion that people who might not be, like, I remember spending a lot of time with developers, you had to know math. It was really helpful. You had to know coding and these other things. And I know when you go through a BCBA program, they don't teach you those things.
Correct. Yeah. So that all came later. Like my exploration to understand code and the back end components came later. But really, I think my drive around my initial exploration and learning was more focused on problem solving. And I think I tend to, as many other BCBAs, not only buy into our science, but believe in kind of cautious skepticism. So, how is this working? Why is it working the way that it's working? How can I try to break it and see if it continues? Like what kind of the back end systems I really enjoyed understanding. So I dove into a lot of independent learning, and that had to happen outside of the space of ABA. We're talking 2+ years ago. And really, in such a new evolving space, it was where you could get those bits and pieces of understanding. And we had the fortunate opportunity to like leverage tools that were accessible to us sooner than they were to others. And so our ability to see what we could do in the testing environments, one of the earliest use cases that we explored and I had a hand in helping was around how we could build chatbots to hopefully support the fact that you don't always have a supervisor in front of you as a BT or a technician, and you may have questions, or maybe you're studying for your exam and you're like, I want to be able to role play a little bit, right? So one of our earliest POCs was exploring how to build and do that and leverage this body of expert knowledge we had within CentralReach Institute to inform safe and reliable chatbot experience. And because we partnered on some of this, that we were able to test that a bit internally. And we did really fun, like red teaming, trying to have expert BCBAs and BCBADs break the structure so that we could build it better. And to me, it married and mirrored a lot of what we do in quality intervention, right? We take what we know to be effective, we gather data on it, we adjust as we need to and rinse and repeat through that iteration. And a lot of our early building was that. Of course, I don't want to blanket it that we did that and put it out to the masses. That's actually a tool 2 years later that we don't have in front of customers for a lot of reasons, but it was a great learning opportunity. And one of the things that we did that feels like a million years ago now, but we also wanted to test the guardrails and the safety and the interactability around these chatbots. And this was, again, 2.5 years ago, but we built a conference chatbot. So it wasn't necessarily ABA content, but it was one of our first, hey, let's see how people interact and engage with this tool. And the backend monitoring and the observability of that was really critical because how are people using this? How are they asking and answering questions? And to provide context to that, it was really simple chatbot that was trained on all of the information around a CentralReach conference, our CR Unite conference. I remember fondly one of the questions in my back-end testing was, when is Dr. Rick Cabina going to speak at the conference? And my hopeful response of this chatbot we had trained up on all the knowledge of the content was to say the location and give a little blurb friendly about how to get there and what you might be in for. And really quickly, again, internal testing early, it was answering questions around you teaching precision teaching, which wasn't on our agenda. So it was really interesting to me. I was like, oh, definitely has some back end training knowledge that it's putting into this output in a way that wasn't how I intended it. And so it allowed me to dive deeper and utilize the tools that we have to learn more about guardrails and safety responses and RAG infrastructures, which I try to be not too technical in this, but is really just structuring and controlling the environment of how we want the input or the user question to result in an appropriate output. And so that was a fun operation. And it was over 2 years ago now, which feels wild to even talk about.
Yeah, listening to you speak reminds me of this journey we're all on. November of 2022 came around. That's the advent of ChatGPT. And that's when people say, oh, this is when AI started, which you and I both know AI has been around for a long time. But maybe that's when it was mass market or friendly. And so people mark that. But the hallucinations that happened in just those use cases that you described are so interesting because now people really trust the AI. The hallucinations have gone way down, and like the chatbots and those things, it's just so much easier and it's embedded into everything. So listening to how you've spent this journey and how it's going to keep moving forward is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think to that point too is there's so much potential there, but there's also a lot of caution. And I know there are individual use cases, and we've talked about this together where no, I'm not going to use a chatbot for that, or it's not up to
Yeah.
my standards, or it's more frustrating and you just want to be in front of the human, right? And so a lot of our focus is never to replace that human, we say human in the loop, but from our perspective on some of the tools we're working on now, never to replace that clinical human judgment, the reason why and the value that we bring as experts in our field. And a lot of my day to day work at the moment is around how we can evaluate and monitor those tools and the outputs of those tools in a safe and effective way so that we are supporting clinicians in their decision making, but that their expertise remains forefront. Because to your point, the questions or the responses seem great and oftentimes are, and these tools are only getting better, right? But there's research on the cognitive decline and impact of usership. I read a recent article and I have to get the citation, but 17 to 25-year olds, so the college age, and you probably know this as a professor, but documented cognitive decline around like it is very easy to set it and forget it with what these outputs are giving you. And it's a path of least resistance, especially in our field with an overburdened workforce, right? There are not enough of us. We are tasked with a lot. So it's a natural inclination to leverage something that is getting us there quicker. But to do that and to embed, responsible and ethical AI into our workflows should always be paramount to me. So that's something that I am currently finding myself in within my work at CentralReach, which has been really interesting and hopefully continues to be of value because I think it's important for us to explore these things safely.
You just actually segued into my second question.
Oh,
And you were
Miko.
talking about ethics, but my question was, tell me what you do at CentralReach and what do your responsibilities entail? And it
Yeah,
sounds like what you've already said, you do work around ethics, you do technical things. I'm assuming that there's like, just tell us, who do you interface with? What's a day in the life look like? Expand
sure.
on what you just said so people can have a good understanding of what it means and what are potential roles that people might have in the future. We're at an AI forward company, a tech forward company, and it's only going to happen more. And my hope is that behavior analysis continues to be married with technology. You're living that, you have been living that. And I'm sure from when you started in your role to where it is now, I'm sure your role is evolving.
Oh, totally. So I talked about kind of those early state chatbot explorations, and that's not really a lot of where my current day to day work lives. But what was interesting and unique about that experience is it allowed me, and the technology and the advancements of AI and innovation right now allowed me to operate as the subject matter expert, knowing what I needed to solve a problem and being able to build it with the tools that were at my disposal, which was really cool. And now, by no means am I working for a software developer and building all of those tools in isolation. Not at all. We have amazing engineers and developer teams that are putting out really great, useful content and features for those that we serve. But having that lens as a BCBA to partner and liaison with that for some of the use cases is been really interesting. And I'm one of many, right? There's BCBAs throughout CentralReach that are touching some of these tools and prototyping and supporting their development or doing some testing and giving feedback to why this is great and maybe shift this, not only from the UI perspective, but also from the internal quality validation. And so a lot of my work right now and a small but mighty team, we are looking at how we can ensure that there's ongoing clinical validation in some of the tools and the outputs of those tools. So when I say outputs, things like session summaries, we're leveraging AI through our tool called Note Draft AI that takes all of the input from a BT or RBT session in CR Mobile and generates a draft. It doesn't submit a final session note. It's not the permanent product document. It's a step there so that BTs and RBTs can visualize the information in the context that they've provided in a session in a quick way, and then edit it and review it and ensure accuracy and then submit that. So I like to say it's getting them 80% of the way there. And we know that equates to a time savings, right? But the intention is not to remove their requirement on clinical documentation. That's a skill we probably don't teach or learn enough about in our field, but it's an important one, right? It drives payer decisions, it drives hopefully clinical decisions from the teams that are able to surface that information and those insights in a way that they could use it to train their staff, to support clinical documentation and decision making. From a generative AI standpoint, and what I mean by that is it's a tool leveraging LLMs, so those large language models, to draft a narrative based off of all that context and not do things like pull in information from other places, like in the chatbot I described in our early testing. But to see, is it surfacing the information clinically and responsively? And so we have set up evaluative structures internally to monitor those. And then we have SME experts that also look those over. So the scale kind of automation of evaluation is also leveraging AI. So we're using AI to generate outputs that clinicians can review, give their seal of approval, add their context, make changes if they notice something off, and submit. And then internally and ongoing, we have automation to support, is it hitting these key metrics? Is it generating the content in the way that we would feel is accurate, is reliable? And so we've actually been able to build, and this was a really cool internal tool where we built a visualization and app where SMEs can go in and do go in, and it monitors how long it takes them to review something and what critical elements they're reviewing for, so that we're able to surface insights and better improve our tool. So the clinical validation and evaluation, I could talk about this all day long. Shout out to my colleague Haley Shear, who is constantly talking about this with me. We geek out over it, but it's really using what we know about good quality supervision and ABA and applying it to the robots. A
Yeah.
lack of a better way to say it. It's applying the same exact principles where we need to measure, we need to define what good is and what we're looking at, and then we need to make decisions based off of those data points. And so it's been a really fun and wild trip, and now we're going to replicate that across other tools that we have in CentralReach's roadmap.
I know that what you just described in a lot of what you do, clinical governance for AI, that's seems daunting because CentralReach does offer a whole suite of practice management types of software, different applications, but yet there's also clinical. You have to govern that, and there's a lot of ethics. Do you also find yourself in positions where you're working with people on the product team, helping to design the products and shape them in different directions?
Yeah, as a console, and I think it depends on the use case, right? Because we have operational, like workflow driven tools, we have tools to support billing automation, and we have subject matter experts that deal very intimately with that and know that, right? So I'm not the appropriate person for a billing tool. The bulk of my career was not interfacing with payers, right? So thinking of that subject matter expertise unique to the use case, to me, there's good alignment with that. It's also unique to what we intend as good output, right? So I wouldn't be able to clinically validate whether billing or workflow automation was doing what it was intended unless I had all of the understanding of that. But I would lean on the experts there. So part of this big word of governance is how do we shape that across CentralReach's ecosystem? How do we shape that so that we're all aware of a higher risk tool or interface that is leveraging AI gets a higher amount of audit, observability, evaluation, and that way we can feel really solid in the tools that we're putting to the market. And so this is something that, again, going back to operational definition, CentralReach has a responsible AI and behavior analysis framework that has driven our development and co-development amongst clinicians and those engineers and developer experts. And really breaking that down and operationally defining, what does that mean? What does it mean for each tool? How do we ensure that we feel it's reaching the quality thresholds that we would expect before we're now piloting with our customers? And part of that is not only using our internal experts, which we have a number of BCBAs and we pull folks in from where their area of expertise is, but also working directly with our customers, which is something that I love CR's team has done so well. And our developers, our engineers, our AI team folks are working directly with the customers to build the tools that meet their needs. One thing that I like to talk about and I think is important that we talk about is just because AI can do something doesn't mean that it should. And so understanding what those workflows actually like look like and how they're supportive and meet those problem solving needs is important. So I'm happy to be like one small part of that, but governance at CentralReach is not just people with governance in their title. It really is something that we have woven in and hopefully will continue to weave into all that we're doing.
There's a lot to digest there. I have, like you, been involved with CentralReach and had a career before that with behavior analysis. And one of the things you mentioned that I don't think a lot of people who haven't like peeked inside of CentralReach, we have, what do we have, like 50 BCBAs and
I think
four
it's
or
around
five?
40 to 50 and they're interspersed throughout too, which is cool.
Yeah.
It's not like we're all in this one bubble together. Like we have people in all facets doing really cool work.
And we have BCBADs who are also looking at and doing things. And I just find it remarkable that you have these people who have never interfaced with behavior analysis, have never heard of behavior analysis before they came to the company, but yet they're creating these products and moving forward. And it's just fascinating to me to have an insider's look at this and seeing how it's developing. But
It is really cool too. We have some product people who are like, I jokingly say like honorary RBT or BCBA, like they really do and have learned what our field kind of demands and needs and how our users experience our tools in a way that allows them to bring their expertise, but have an awareness and understanding of why we do what we do. That was probably something that surprised me here because you think BCBAs, we know what we know, right? And many of us feel very strongly about it. I think about my time spent in school settings and how you have to really shape people's understanding and kind of willingness to work with you, right? Because there's a lot of demands in different facets, but ultimately, shaping works, reinforcement works. And so collaborating with our colleagues in ways that like is not different than how we would collaborate with others in similar domains. How in a school setting you might work with OTs and speech and PTs in and working with general ed teachers. I see that parallel. I spent a lot of time in schools and would love to build some efficiencies around there too, because it again is a burden work first, but they might not have the level of expertise that we have in behavior analysis. That doesn't mean we don't have the same end goals. And so the end goals at CentralReach are to deliver products that help those that we support to make meaningful change in people's lives and to see so many people at our company be mission aligned or have family members that are impacted and want to work towards that shared goal and mission has been really cool. I sound pro CR, right? I'm like singing our
sure,
praise here. But it is
it's okay
really
to
it's
love your job,
really
Kelly.
yeah, I do really like my job. I enjoy the mission, and I think it's been incredible to learn and grow and to be given the space to do that in a way that almost 5 years or however long I've been here, this is AI was not on my radar then either. Just like you said, AI, when I became a behavior analyst, it existed, but it wasn't on my radar, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Let me ask you a big question for one of the last things that I wanted to bring up. And there's no one right answer to this, but from your perspective, you've had this journey where you were in the chair, you were collecting data by hand, you were doing everything that our science says you should do to help people on the applied side. And now we have AI, and we both work at this company where we're trying to create these tools to help practitioners. So, in your words, create these excellent outcomes, these superior outcomes. What should behavior analysts, what do you think is important for, and this isn't just a general
Yeah.
question, but what do you see that's important for BCBAs who are in the field? Some are just getting credentialed now, and they're never
Yeah.
going to know their life without AI. So what do
Isn't
you,
that wild?
it is crazy.
It is so wild and age ourselves, right? But going to school without phones and devices, and my kids can't comprehend that. And now the idea that how easy could it be to submit a paper on time? It might not be the right or ethical thing, but and I'm sure you are impacting this in your teaching or you're impacted by this. How can we leverage AI responsibly? And I'm going to take my CR hat off. I feel confident that CentralReach is doing that, especially on our clinical generative AI tools, those that I have a direct hand in, and feel good about my work day in and day out. But outside of that, for behavior analysts, we really have to adjust our learning around AI literacy. And this is something that is not unique to my perspective. I have colleagues outside of CR who feel really strongly about this too. I'm a part of an ethics group that works to put out some guidelines and resources on how we might do this for our field. But by and large, we act according to an ethical code and we have professional obligations. And part of that is expanding scope of competency where it's appropriate to do. I would argue that we all need some expansion of scope of competency related to AI, understanding AI's impact, understanding the risks and limitations to leveraging AI, and how the onus is on us to be responsible in that and to be like cautious consumers. I think for behavior analysts to ensure that they're doing some small step to that. Maybe it's listening to a podcast like this or attending a webinar that exists, exploring CEU content, or leveraging information outside of our field. The space of AI in healthcare has a lot of research that maybe isn't directly related to ABA, but is because it's in the domain of healthcare or of healthcare documentation, for example. And so we can do our due diligence to try to hopefully disseminate and educate amongst those young professionals and people in their coursework. And as a college professor, you're likely encountering this, leveraging some of the frameworks that do exist outside of our space to see how we can explore AI responsibly, because in my opinion, it's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to be embedded more and more in workflows. So understanding where, having the transparency around, oh, this is leveraging AI and here's how, and here's what I need to do as a cautious consumer of that, because the oversight should remain with humans at this point for all things clinically touching. I feel really strongly about that. I think the tools that we're putting out mirror that in how they're structured and what the kind of onus and responsibility is on customers. And it's scary to be faced with the unknown. I want to acknowledge that. Like, we didn't expect this 3, 5, 6 years ago. We don't know all that's to come. We can hypothesize about that, but leaning in and having empathy around, like, everyone's at a different space of acceptance, awareness, understanding around AI and the tools. And so using what we know as like good people who understand the science of behavior to be cautious consumers. And so I think that is important. I think it's the way that I've tried to approach the work that I'm doing. There's a ton that's possible. And I wish there was 80 more hours in every day to explore it. But grounding ourselves in our ethics and where we stand is something that I've been able to lean on. And I hope that it helps others too.
That's a great answer. Looking at some of that literature that you mentioned outside of the field, it's scary. The people tend to, you tend to hear about the success of AI, but you don't hear a lot about the problems with AI, and they exist. And although we talked earlier about hallucinations and how they were very frequent, they still do happen. Not too long ago, you would do a search on something, you go into Google or whatever your search engine is, and you get all of these links, and you have to go through them and figure out, okay, what's the likely source of truth? But now you just put it into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever your favorite LLM is, and it gives you this answer, and you accept that one answer, and you're not verifying it. And I think that being a cautious consumer is really good advice, because it's hard to, people really are trustful, because AI most of the time, and I'd love to know these stats, and I probably could research it, how frequently it's right and how just it keeps getting more and more
Yeah.
ubiquitous and easier to use in our daily lives. Hey, what's this? Take a picture of it, and it tells you exactly what it is. And
Mhm.
there's always the risk in our field. Oh, I use ChatGPT at my house to do these cool things. Maybe I should do this. Oh, what's my client doing? I snap a picture of my client. It's
Don't do
very easy to just move to doing something that
that.
is
Yeah.
innocent, but is incredibly problematic on terms of ethics and all sorts of things. And
And the takeaway here, Dr. Kavina did not tell you to take pictures of your clients and put them into ChatGPT.
exactly,
We're
exactly.
giving extreme examples. I think it's funny because you said you're not seeing a lot, you're seeing all of the potential. And I work in this space of the risk, I guess. So I see the opposite. Everything is flooding me with warning, risk, and how this has had a negative impact and what to be cautious on around there. So I definitely lean more towards the protector space of how we can put good systems in place to avoid some of those what could be catastrophes. And I think don't leverage that which you don't understand. That's a probably cool takeaway for people that are maybe new to the space of AI and how they might individually use and leverage AI. And also being aware that if you're not sure, like how a tool's functioning or whether it's safe to input information, you need to ask for clarity around that. So, whether you have a supervisor you're working with or a colleague or you go to your company, but chances are like it's the open source type information that you might have from a chat GPT you don't pay for, or your company doesn't have a strong guardrail around, that's not the space to be like inputting or leveraging any information. Don't input PHI, etc. But it's interesting to me when you say, I'm seeing all of the potentials. And I love that because you are one of those amazing, look what's possible. And I try to be too. I think it's part of the reason why I'm here and building fun and cool, practical, functional tools. But I have this like bubble of protection around it that I constantly feel a little freaked out by whether we're doing the right thing in the ways that we are and how we can structure that to make sure that it continues. Don't know if I answered your question there, talked in a lot of circles, but the takeaway, don't take pictures of your clients. Definitely not without consent. If you're a BCBA or BT listening here, and be sure you understand what you're doing with the tool that you're using.
Yeah. Kelly, this conversation has been great. I appreciate your experience and even more than that, your wisdom.
Oh, coming from you, that is an honor. And it's always good to catch up and to collaborate with you. So thanks for bringing me on. Thanks for chatting through this.
I had a lot of takeaways from this conversation, and I know our audience members did also. Thank you, and thank you, audience members, for joining us on ABA On Call.
See ya. Thanks.
You've been listening to ABA On Call. Conversations like this keep our field moving, and we're glad to have you with us. If you're completing the CEU, take a moment to finish the quiz. Until our next episode, keep looking closely and thinking critically.